Shocked Malon officers watched helplessly as a massive asteroid vaporized under the assault of a human diplomatic ship's terrifying Singularity missile, proving beyond doubt the destructive potential of the strange upstart race daring to challenge the galaxy's ancient order. Kevin Stevens, captain of the UES Retribution, smiled grimly as he watched the Malon ships hastily break off their aggressive intercept, cowed by this casual demonstration of human power. The Retribution continued unchallenged toward Maloros, capital planet of the Milan and seat of the Galactic Council, to which Earth Command had ordered Stevens to attend an emergency meeting. No human starship had ever approached the galactic capital before. Predictably, the Milan had required the Retribution to stand down and prepare to be boarded for inspection before proceeding. Outraged by the naked insult to human sovereignty, Stevens had refused, warning that any hostile action would be met with overwhelming force. After the Milan ships launched an initial salvo of laser fire and torpedoes, the Retribution's advanced energy shields easily absorbed the impacts, and when continued warnings went unheeded, Stevens ordered the Singularity missile launched against the nearby asteroid as a show of force. Now, as the gleaming silver human battlecruiser took up orbit around Maloros, its advanced technology and exotic alloys on full display, the destructive potential of humanity was clear to all. On the planet below, the gathered representatives of 1,000 spacefaring races convened in an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, unprepared to face a species that could so easily humble the galaxy's foremost power. Rumors spread like wildfire of the humans' brazen refusal to submit to the ancient galactic codes, and worried speculation rose that the long galactic peace may be coming to an end. If the humans could not be placated or controlled, then all were surely doomed. Captain Kevin Stevens materialized on the surface of Maloros in a shimmer of transporter energy, his senior officers flanking him on either side. The human delegation strode forward confidently, their polished boots clicking against the alien stone of the landing platform. All around them, a cacophony of strange alien tongues filled the air as the gathered council delegates gaped and whispered, staring at the humans with a mix of awe, fear, and hostility. Towering insectoids, luminous energy beings, tentacled creatures, representatives from 1,000 worlds, most of whom had never seen a human in the flesh before. Stevens met their myriad eyes unflinchingly. The humans were escorted into the Grand Council chamber, an immense spherical room with tiered balconies full of even more alien delegates. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Stevens took the central speaker's podium, his officers arraying themselves behind him. He gazed out at the sea of alien faces, cleared his throat, and began to speak. "People of the galaxy," Stevens began, his voice amplified and translated. "I come before you today as an emissary of Earth, a world which has recently emerged onto the galactic stage. Humanity desires only peaceful coexistence and trade with—" "Lies," a voice thundered, interrupting. Stevens turned to see a tall, silver-haired Malon in ornate robes striding forward, High Counselor Zalos, the supreme Malon leader. "These humans brazenly defy our most ancient laws. They refuse to submit to inspection and fired upon ships of the Council's own defense fleet." Zelos thrust a long finger toward Stevens, his lined face twisted with anger. "I demand that Earth surrender all its advanced military technology to this Council immediately for the safety and security of every species." Stevens slammed a fist on the podium, his eyes flashing. "Earth will do no such thing," he shot back. "The Milan's hostile actions against our ship were themselves a breach of galactic peace. Humanity will not be cowed by alien threats. We will defend ourselves, our world, and our way of life against any act of aggression." The captain drew himself up to his full height, voice rising. "This council must recognize Earth as a sovereign power, one which will be an equal member of the galactic community, not a subordinate." Instantly, the chamber erupted into a roar of arguing voices, 1,000 alien tongues shouting over one another in response to this shocking proclamation. High Counselor Zelos opened his mouth to yell a retort, and then the far wall exploded inward in a flash of blinding light and pulverized debris. Alarms shrieked to life as the delegates screamed and scattered. Stevens and his men ducked behind the podium, snatching out their sidearms. Smoke poured through the breach as alien security officers shouted panicked reports about unknown ships descending from orbit, bombarding the city. The humans sprinted out of the chamber and skidded to a halt, staring upward in shock. A fleet of matte black warships was pushing through the clouds, their exotic curves and angles unlike any known design. Searing beams of incandescent energy lanced down from the ships, blasting towers and domes to molten rubble. The once pristine capital burned as chunks of flaming debris rained across the skyline. Stevens jabbed at his comlink. "Stevens to Retribution, engage those ships," he yelled over the noise. "Get some fire support down here now. All UES personnel, rally on me. We need to defend this facility." Pounding bootfalls, plasma fire and detonations, panicked alien screams. Stevens and his officers rushed forward to join the beleaguered council security teams. Up ahead, squads of hulking soldiers in midnight black armor were smashing through the outer defensive lines, the muzzles of their weapons strobing with deadly light. "Hold the line!" Stevens bellowed, dropping into a crouch and opening fire. UES officers and council guards did the same, plasma bolts and kinetic rounds whining through the smoke. Black armored attackers fell as human marksmanship found its mark again and again. Through the haze, Stevens glimpsed a towering humanoid figure at the rear of the enemy force. The apparent commander wore the same matte armor as his troops, barking orders in a guttural alien language. As if sensing the scrutiny, the figure turned. Glowing red eyes locked with Stevens' gaze. Then a storm of plasma fire and shrapnel ripped through the space between them, forcing Stevens to duck. When he looked again, the enemy leader was gone, vanished into the chaos of the invasion. "Zythron Dominion vessels detected." Lieutenant Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the Retribution's bridge. 30-plus ships entering low orbit. Captain Stevens' eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. "So that's who's behind this. Weapons free. Target their lead ships and fire at will." The Retribution's advanced weapon systems roared to life. Brilliant lances of energy and swarms of missiles streaked across space, slamming into the Zythron fleet. Enemy ships buckled and shattered under the onslaught, their own return fire barely scratching the human vessel's shields. "Push them back!" Stevens barked. "I want those bastards out of my sky!" The battle in orbit raged as the Retribution danced through enemy formations, its superior technology and the skill of its crew proving decisive. Zythron ships fell one after another until the remnants of their fleet turned tail and fled. "Enemy forces in full retreat, Captain," Tactical Officer Rodriguez reported with a grim smile. "Shall we pursue?" Stevens shook his head. "Negative. Take us into low orbit over the council chambers. We need to support our people on the ground." Down on Maloros's surface, Stevens and his officers found themselves in the thick of a desperate struggle. Zythron ground forces had breached the council's defenses, their midnight black armor gleaming as they poured through the gaps. "Form up!" Stevens shouted, rallying a motley group of human officers, Malin guards, and even a few alien diplomats who'd taken up arms. "We hold this line or the galaxy falls. Watch your sectors and make every shot count." The defenders fought with unbreakable spirit. Human plasma rifles cut swathes through the Zythron ranks, while the aliens contributed their own array of exotic weaponry. But the enemy kept coming, wave after relentless wave. Stevens ducked as a near miss from a Zythron energy weapon scorched the air above his head. He popped up, squeezing off 3 rapid shots that dropped a charging enemy soldier. To his left, a Malin guard fell with a cry, overwhelmed by the press of attackers. "We can't hold much longer," someone shouted over the din of battle. Then Stevens saw him, a massive figure in ornate black armor, directing the Zythron assault, the enemy commander. "Cover me!" Stevens roared, vaulting over their makeshift barricade. He charged through the no-man's land between the two forces, dodging energy bolts and shrapnel. The Zythron commander turned, red eyes gleaming behind his faceplate. He bellowed a challenge in his guttural tongue and raised a crackling power axe. Stevens' cybernetically enhanced muscles propelled him forward as he activated his own combat systems. The two leaders clashed in a fury of movement. Stevens' speed and skill matched against the alien's raw strength and reach. The duel raged back and forth, neither combatant able to land a decisive blow. Stevens' ribs cracked under a thunderous punch, but he countered with a kick that dented the Zathran's armor. Blood and sweat mingled as they grappled and struck, their troops battling around them. Finally, Stevens saw his opening. As the Zathran commander wound up for a killing blow, the human captain ducked under his guard. Stevens drove his combat knife up through a weak point in the alien's armor, burying it to the hilt. The Zathran commander staggered, then collapsed. A great cry went up from the defenders as the enemy troops faltered, their leader fallen. Within minutes, the remaining Zathran forces threw down their weapons in surrender. Stevens stood over his fallen foe, chest heaving. Blood streamed from a dozen wounds, and he could feel at least one leg on the verge of giving out. But they'd won. The council was safe. As the smoke began to clear, Stevens found himself mobbed by grateful aliens, chittering insects, floating energy beings. Even the usually stoic Malon all clamored to shake his hand or offer words of thanks. High Counselor Zelos approached, his ornate robes stained with ash and blood. "Captain Stevens," he said gravely, "it seems we owe you a great debt. Without Earth's intervention—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Stevens nodded, wincing at the movement. "We came here as equals," he said. "Now let's see if we can build a lasting peace, together." Zelos studied the human for a long moment, then inclined his head. "Indeed. Come, Captain. The emergency session awaits, and I believe you have much to say to the gathered delegates." Leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, Stevens followed the High Counselor into the battered council chambers. As he took the floor, facing the tense, expectant faces of 1,000 worlds, he drew a deep breath. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, now hung on what came next. Captain Stevens gripped the edges of the podium, his fingers tightening with tension. The chamber buzzed with a cacophony of alien voices, some fearful, others angry. He took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his cracked ribs, and began to speak. "Members of the Galactic Council," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "We stand here today in the wake of an unprecedented attack. The Zathran assault has shaken us all to our core. But more than that, it has exposed a fundamental flaw in the galactic order we've all taken for granted." Stevens paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Earth's journey to the stars began with hope and wonder. We dreamed of peaceful cooperation, of joining a galactic community. Instead, we found ourselves thrust into conflict from the moment of first contact. He recounted the tense standoff at Maloros, the mistrust and hostility that had nearly led to war. "And now this," he said, gesturing to the damaged chamber around them. "The Zythrans very nearly toppled this council and plunged the galaxy into chaos. We can no longer pretend that the current system is enough to ensure our safety." Stevens's voice hardened. "Let me be clear. Earth is committed to peace, but we will not idly entrust our security to others ever again. As of this moment, Earth is launching a massive shipbuilding and armament program. We will protect our interests across the stars, by force if necessary." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the chamber. Stevens pressed on, outlining plans for a new class of warships that would dwarf even the formidable Retribution. The council erupted into chaos. A serpentine delegate reared up, hissing, "This human militarization is a threat to galactic peace." Others shouted their agreement. But a towering insectoid raised its forelimbs for silence. "The humans saved us all today," it clicked. "Perhaps a stronger military arm is indeed required." High Counselor Zelos stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the chamber's lights. "Captain Stevens," he said, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "While I cannot condone unchecked human rearmament, I—" I cannot deny Earth's right to self-defense after this attack. From the Malin delegation, a younger voice spoke up. Father, said Theros, Zelos' son, the humans have proven their courage. Perhaps we should consider a more conciliatory approach. Stevens seized the moment. Members of the council, he said, his voice ringing out. I propose a challenge. Come to Earth. Witness our capabilities firsthand. To prove our good faith, we'll even turn over the retribution to a temporary Malin crew for study and training. The chamber exploded into frenzied debate. Hours passed as the council argued, tempers flaring and alliances shifting. Finally, Zelos raised a hand for silence. Captain Stevens, he said slowly, we accept your proposal. The council will adjourn to Earth in 3 months' time for these demonstrations. Stevens nodded, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Then if there's nothing else, he said, I believe it's time for me to return home. We have much to prepare. As he limped from the chamber, leaning heavily on his makeshift crutch, Stevens allowed himself a small smile. The journey back to Earth would be long, but the real work was just beginning. The fate of humanity's place among the stars hung in the balance, and he intended to see it secured. 3 months passed in a blur of frenzied activity. As the massive alien transport fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, they encountered an awe-inspiring sight. Dozens of sleek, deadly Retribution-class battlecruisers hung in perfect formation around humanity's homeworld, their matte black hulls absorbing starlight. Fleet Admiral Kevin Stevens stood on the bridge of Earth's orbital shipyard, his newly adorned uniform crisp and spotless. He watched the approaching alien vessels with keen interest. Incoming transmission from the lead ship, sir, his communications officer reported. Stevens nodded. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of High Counselor Zelos. The Malin leader's silver hair seemed to have acquired a few more strands of white since their last encounter. Greetings, Fleet Admiral, Zelos said, his tone carefully neutral. We have arrived as agreed. Stevens inclined his head. Welcome to Earth, High Counselor. If you'll follow the designated flight path, we'll begin docking procedures immediately. As the alien ships maneuvered into position, Stevens caught sight of a familiar face among the delegation. Theros, Zelos' son, stood at attention behind his father. The young Malin's eyes darted about, taking in every detail of the human defenses. Once the visitors had disembarked, Stevens led them on a tour of the orbital facilities. The shipyard stretched for kilometers, a sprawling network of construction bays and assembly lines. As you can see, Stevens explained, gesturing to a half-completed hull, we've made significant advancements in our manufacturing capabilities. Zelos' eyes narrowed as he watched a team of robotic assemblers effortlessly manipulating what appeared to be solid light. What is that material? He asked. Quantum-locked photonic lattice, Stevens replied. It allows us to create hull plating that's virtually indestructible, yet weighs next to nothing. A reptilian delegate hissed in disbelief. Impossible! Such technology is centuries beyond even theoretical research. Stevens simply smiled and continued the tour. As they progressed, the alien visitors grew increasingly agitated. Murmurs of concern rippled through the group. This goes far beyond self-defense, an avian counselor squawked. You're building a war fleet. Stevens turned to face the accusation. We're ensuring our survival in a dangerous galaxy, he stated firmly. Now, shall we proceed to the next phase of the demonstration? Days later, Theros found himself standing on the bridge of the original Retribution. His Malin crew moved about the stations with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. All systems online, sir, his tactical officer reported. The humans have granted us full access. Theros nodded, his fingers dancing across the primary control interface. The sheer complexity of the ship's systems was staggering. Take us out, he ordered. Let's see what this vessel can really do. The Retribution glided out of its berth, joining a waiting squadron of Earth's newest warships. What followed was a series of war games that left Theros and his crew stunned. Time and again, they found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The Retribution's Singularity missiles tore through simulated targets with terrifying ease, while its Alcubierre drive allowed it to dance between points in space faster than Theros could track. "Evasive action!" Theros barked as another volley of simulated fire streaked towards them. The ship bucked and heaved, artificial gravity struggling to compensate. Warning klaxons blared as system after system registered simulated failures. By the end of the exercises, Theros' crew was battered and demoralized, several nursing burns and bruises from overloaded consoles. The final tally was clear. In any real conflict, they wouldn't have stood a chance. As the demonstration reached its climax, Theros watched in awe as hundreds of Retribution-class ships moved in perfect synchronization. They flowed through space like a school of predatory fish, executing maneuvers that defied belief. Even his father, the usually unflappable Zelos, seemed shaken by the display. The High Counselor's hands gripped the railing of the observation deck, knuckles pale beneath his scaled skin. When it was over, Theros found himself face to face with Fleet Admiral Stevens in the Retribution's docking bay. The two leaders regarded each other for a long moment before clasping forearms in a warrior's salute. "You've certainly made your point, Admiral," Theros said quietly. Stevens nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "The galaxy's changing, Theros. We intend to be ready for whatever comes next." As Theros turned to rejoin his father and the rest of the council delegation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed the dawn of a new era in galactic politics. Humanity had planted its flag among the stars, and the shockwaves of that act would. The massive alien orbital habitat loomed over Earth, its crystalline spires glinting in the sunlight. Inside, the emergency council chamber buzzed with frantic activity. Delegates from 1,000 worlds huddled in tense groups, their voices rising and falling in a cacophony of alien languages. High Counselor Zelos strode to the central podium, his silver robes swirling. He raised his arms for silence, and the chamber gradually fell quiet. "Members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "We have witnessed an unprecedented display of military might from the humans. This cannot stand." A chorus of angry shouts erupted from one side of the chamber. The Vorax delegation, their scaled hides filled, roared their approval. "We must crush this human threat before it's too late," the Vorax ambassador bellowed. But from the other side came cries of dissent. The Quarren, a race of crystalline beings, raised their faceted appendages. "The humans saved us from the Zathrons," their representative chimed. "Perhaps we should seek alliance, not confrontation." The debate raged for hours, with tempers flaring and old grudges resurfacing. In one corner, the normally placid Medusan delegation engaged in a shoving match with the silicon-based Lithorians. Theros watched it all unfold, his stomach churning. When his father called on him to present the tactical data from the Retribution demonstrations, he hesitated. I cannot in good conscience share that information," Theros said, his voice faltering. "The humans placed their trust in us." Zelos' eyes flashed with anger. "You would betray your own people?" he hissed. On Earth, Admiral Stevens stood before a wall of holographic displays in the Pentagon's war room. Each screen showed a different alien delegation, their discussions carefully monitored and translated. "It's a powder keg up there," General Hawkins muttered, shaking his head. Stevens nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to move fast." He turned to face the assembled human leaders. "I propose we reach out directly to the more amenable races. Offer them partnership, not subjugation." The room erupted into heated discussion. Defense Minister Chen slammed her fist on the table. "We can't trust any of them," she shouted. "We should strike first, while we have the advantage." Stevens shook his head. "No, we didn't come this far to become conquerors." He activated a secure comm channel. "Get me the Quarren ambassador. I think it's time we had a chat." Back on the orbital, Theros slipped away from the chaos of the council chamber. He made his way to a secluded maintenance corridor, his heart's pounding. After ensuring he wasn't followed, he activated a tiny quantum entanglement device. "Admiral Stevens," he whispered, "we have a problem. The hardliners are pushing for preemptive action against Earth." Stevens's voice crackled through the device. "We suspected as much. How soon?" "Days, maybe hours," Theros replied. "I can't stay here. I'm coming back to Earth." "Understood," Stevens said. "We'll have a ship waiting for you." As Theros ended the transmission, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see his father standing at the end of the corridor, flanked by 2 Vorax guards. "You disappoint me, my son," Zelos said, his voice cold. In Earth orbit, the massive shipyards hummed with frantic activity. Swarms of construction drones swarmed over half-finished hulls, assembling mighty warships at a breakneck pace. Stevens stood on the observation deck, watching the controlled chaos unfold. A proximity alert chimed, and he turned to see a sleek Quarren vessel approaching. "Let's hope this works," he muttered. As the first diplomatic meetings began, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Troop carriers were being loaded, battle fleets were forming up, the drums of war were beating, growing louder by the hour. The orbital shipyards over Earth hummed with frantic activity. Admiral Stevens stood on the observation deck, watching as another Retribution-class battlecruiser slid from its berth. The sleek vessel joined a growing armada, its black hull absorbing the light of distant stars. "Production rates have doubled again, sir," reported Captain Chen, handing Stevens a datapad. "We're churning out a new ship every 36 hours. Stevens nodded, his eyes never leaving the fleet. "It's not enough. Push harder. I want round-the-clock shifts at every facility." As Earth's defenses grew, Stevens dispatched expeditionary fleets to secure vital resources. On a distant moon rich in rare minerals, human miners and engineers worked tirelessly. Massive excavators tore into alien soil, feeding sprawling refineries. Ambassador Talara of the Quarren watched the operation with fascination. Her crystalline form glittered as she turned to Stevens. "Your people's efficiency is impressive, Admiral. We are honored to formalize our alliance." Stevens clasped the ambassador's fasted appendage. "The honor is ours. Together, we'll forge a new era of peace and prosperity." Meanwhile, in the depths of Malon space, Counselor Zelos paced before a vast holographic display. It showed the positions of thousands of ships, carriers, battleships, and swarms of smaller craft. "The humans mock us with their insolence," Zelos snarled. "We will crush their pathetic industry and remind them of their place." A Vorax general hissed in agreement. "Our fleets stand ready, Counselor. Give the word, and we will reduce Earth to ash." Back on Earth, Theros hunched over a secure terminal, his fingers flying across the alien interface. Stevens leaned in, studying the data streaming across the screen. "This is everything," Theros said, his voice low. "Fleet compositions, tactical doctrines, even the personal command styles of key officers." Stevens clasped the young Malon's shoulder. "You've done well, Theros. This information will save countless lives." In a hardened facility deep beneath the surface of Ganymede, Stevens initiated the Saturn Protocol. Engineers and scientists worked feverishly, pushing the limits of human technology. "The new spinal-mounted singularity cannons are stable," reported Dr. Hawkins, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "We've managed to increase yield by 300% without compromising structural integrity." Stevens nodded, a grim smile playing at his lips. "Excellent. Begin full-scale production immediately." Months passed, tensions rising. In the council chambers, Stevens maintained a facade of diplomatic engagement. "We seek only peaceful coexistence," he assured the moderates, even as his fleets took up defensive positions throughout Sol. The calm shattered as the Malin Armada burst from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Retribution squadrons surged to meet them, weapons blazing. The void lit up with the flash of energy weapons and the silent explosions of dying ships. Admiral Stevens stood on the bridge of his flagship, barking orders as the battle raged. "Concentrate fire on their carriers. Don't let them launch their fighter screens. For hours, the two fleets clashed in a brutal dance of destruction. Human tactics and superior technology began to tell as Malin ships fell in growing numbers. Then, a new threat emerged. A massive dreadnought, easily twice the size of a retribution, tore into the fray. Its weapons lashed out, vaporizing human ships with terrifying ease. "All ships fall back," Stevens ordered, watching helplessly as entire wings of his fleet vanished in nuclear fire. As defeat loomed, Stevens played his final card. "Activate Saturn units," he commanded, his voice steady. From the shadows of Jupiter's moons they came, titanic vessels that dwarfed even the Milan dreadnought. Their very appearance sent shockwaves through both fleets as they lumbered into battle. The lead Saturn-class ship brought its main gun to bear. A blinding beam of concentrated singularity energy lanced out, punching clean through the Malon behemoth. The alien vessel shuddered, secondary explosions rippling along its length before it split apart in a silent cataclysm. In mere minutes, the tide turned. A dozen more capital ships fell to the unstoppable onslaught of the human dreadnoughts. Panicked transmissions filled the comms as the remnants of the Malon fleet. The Milan fleet scattered, their once mighty armada reduced to a disorganized rabble fleeing Earth's gravitational well. Admiral Stevens watched from the bridge of his flagship as the remnants of the alien force vanished into hyperspace. "Pursue and destroy?" asked his XO. Stevens shook his head. "No, we press our advantage elsewhere." He turned to face the holographic tactical display dominating the bridge. "All ships, form up. We're taking the fight to them." Within hours, a vast human armada surged from Earth's orbit. Newly minted Retribution-class battlecruisers fell into formation alongside the towering Saturn dreadnoughts. As they accelerated towards their first target, Stevens addressed the fleet. "Today we claim our place among the stars," he said, his voice carried across thousands of ships. "Not as conquerors, but as liberators." The first world fell within days. Human marines stormed its orbital defenses, while precision strikes from Retribution cruisers neutralized ground-based weapons. By the time the Saturn-class ships entered orbit, the planet's leaders were already suing for peace. Similar scenes played out across a dozen systems. Alien worlds, long chafing under council rule, welcomed the humans as saviors. In the wake of military victories came waves of diplomats and engineers, bearing promises of protection and technological marvels. On the lush world of Xanthi Prime, Stevens met with representatives from a coalition of smaller races. The Quarren ambassador, her crystalline form refracting the sunlight, spoke for the group. "We have watched your victories with great interest, Admiral," she chimed. "The Council's grip weakens. We wish to stand with humanity." Stevens nodded, his expression grave. "We welcome your support," he said. "But understand, this alliance comes with responsibilities as well as benefits." As the diplomats hammered out the details, human technicians were already at work upgrading Xanthian defensive systems. In return, massive freighters laden with raw materials departed for Earth's hungry shipyards. But even as humanity's sphere of influence expanded, a new threat loomed. Deep in Council space, Councilor Zelos rallied his remaining forces. The Saurian worlds, a cluster of heavily fortified systems ruled by a militant reptilian species, became his final redoubt. Stevens studied reports from recon drones, frowning at the formidable defenses arrayed against them. Energy shields enveloped entire planets, while minefields and automated weapon platforms choked the surrounding space. "A direct assault would be costly," mused General Chen, studying the same data. "Even with our technological edge, we'd bleed ourselves dry taking those worlds." Stevens nodded, his mind racing. "Then we don't take them, not directly." He pulled up a star chart, zooming in on a nondescript system far from the front lines. "We strike here instead, initiating Project Chariot." Days later, a massive human fleet jumped into the Saurian-held Epsilon Eridani system. As Retribution cruisers engaged the meager orbital defenses, 3 Saturn dreadnoughts descended towards the verdant agricultural world below. Panic spread through the alien population as the massive ships darkened the sky. Hastily organized militia units crumbled in the face of precise orbital strikes and waves of dropships disgorging elite human shock troops. Within hours, the planet's governor transmitted his surrender. Human forces spread across the surface, securing vital infrastructure and pacifying pockets of resistance. By nightfall, the Terran flag flew over the alien capital. In his command bunker light years away, Counselor Zelos received news of the sudden loss. He thumped his hand against a console, scaled hide flushing with rage. "They've outmaneuvered us again," he snarled. "But this isn't over." He turned to his advisors, eyes glinting with malice. "If we can't beat them in open battle, we'll make holding that world a living nightmare." Across the captured planet, shadowy figures slipped from hiding. Explosions rocked newly established human outposts as a campaign of sabotage and terror began. The war for. Admiral Stevens stood on the bridge of his flagship, surveying the holographic display of New Avalon. The planet's surface bustled with activity as human forces worked to secure and rebuild the conquered world. "Status report," he barked. Captain Chen stepped forward, datapad in hand. "Sir, we've restored 60% of the planet's industrial capacity. Shipyards are operating at full capacity, churning out Retribution-class vessels every 72 hours. Stevens nodded, his eyes fixed on the swarm of construction drones swarming over skeletal ship frames. "And the resistance." Chen's face tightened. "Still active, sir. We've had 3 bombings in the past week alone. Engineering teams are working double shifts to repair the damage." A nearby console chimed. Stevens turned to see a young lieutenant, her face pale. "Sir, we've intercepted a transmission. You need to see this." The holographic display flickered, replaced by grainy footage of a city street. Alien civilians huddled in doorways as armored human troops marched past. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the scene. As the dust settled, the camera panned to show a human tank, its turret swiveling to target a nearby building. A brief burst of plasma fire, and the structure collapsed. Stevens's teeth clenched as he watched. "Shut it off," he growled. The lieutenant complied, and the bridge fell silent. "They're trying to paint us as oppressors," Chen said quietly. Stevens turned to face his crew. "We didn't start this war, but by God, we'll finish it. Initiate Protocol Omega. I want every inch of this planet locked down." Within hours, the streets of New Avalon cities were filled with the heavy tread of robotic sentries. Human military police units conducted house-to-house searches, dragging suspected insurgents from their homes. In a makeshift command center, Stevens oversaw the operation. Screens flickered with live feeds from across the planet. On one, a squad of troops surrounded a group of aliens, weapons trained on the cowering figures. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports of uprisings on 3 other colony worlds." Stevens's fingers dug into the console. "Deploy the Retribution squadrons. I want those insurrections crushed." As New Avalon fell under an iron grip, Counselor Zelos sat in a plush office on a distant world. The Grex Corporation's headquarters towered above a sprawling metropolis, its gleaming spires a testament to the cartel's wealth and power. "The humans grow bolder by the day," Zelos hissed, addressing a group of shadowy figures. "We must strike back, or all will be lost." A Grex executive, his suit immaculate, leaned forward. "Our resources are at your disposal, Counselor, but we expect a return on our investment." Zelos nodded, a cruel smile playing across his scaled features. "Of course, when we crush the human menace, you'll have your pick of their conquered worlds." In a secret shipyard deep within Grex territory, work crews labored over massive hulls. Engineers pored over schematics, fine-tuning weapons systems capable of rivaling the dreaded Saturn-class dreadnoughts. Back on Earth, Stevens faced a storm of controversy. Protests erupted outside military headquarters, crowds chanting for an end to the brutal tactics employed on conquered worlds. In a secure briefing room, Stevens addressed his top advisors. We can't afford to show weakness now, he said, his voice hard. The retribution dispositions will continue until order is restored. As the meeting adjourned, Stevens caught a glimpse of a news broadcast. The headline scrolled across the screen. Human forces, liberators or conquerors? He turned away, his face a mask of stone. The war had entered a new phase, and the line between right and wrong grew blurrier by the day. The tranquility of space shattered as alarms blared across the bridge of the Indomitable. Admiral Stevens jerked awake, his eyes snapping to the tactical display. "Report!" he barked. Lieutenant Kira's fingers danced across her console. "Sir, we're picking up multiple hyperspace signatures. They're everywhere." Stevens watched in horror as dozens of massive shapes materialized around his fleet. The new Grex dreadnoughts dwarfed even the Saturn-class ships, their sleek hulls dripping with weaponry. "All ships, battle stations," Stevens ordered. "Defensive formation Delta." His words died as a blinding beam of energy lanced out from the lead Grex vessel. It sliced through a Retribution-class cruiser like paper, the proud ship vanishing in a silent explosion. "My God," Captain Chen whispered. "Sir, their weapons output is off the charts. Our shields can't—" Another blast rocked the Indomitable. Stevens steadied himself against a console, watching helplessly as his fleet was torn apart. "Fall back," he shouted. "All ships emergency jump to Rally Point Omega." As the battered human fleet retreated, Stevens received the grim reports. 3 battle groups ambushed, thousands dead, and now New Avalon itself was under attack. The planet's defenses crumbled under a relentless cyber assault. Grex infiltrators poured from landing craft, overwhelming military outposts and civilian centers alike. In the capital city, Private Sarah Cooper huddled behind a makeshift barricade, her rifle clutched tight. "They're coming!" someone screamed. Sarah peeked over the barrier, her eyes widening at the sea of advancing Grex soldiers. She squeezed the trigger, her weapons spitting plasma bolts into the alien ranks. For every Grex that fell, 2 more took its place. A grenade detonated nearby, showering Sarah with debris. The air filled with the screams of the dying and the stench of burning flesh. High above the planet, the Indomitable limped into orbit. Stevens stared at the monstrous Grex flagship dominating the view screen. Its hull seemed to shimmer, deflecting the Indomitable's most powerful attacks. "Sir," Kira reported, her voice tight, "singularity cannons are having no effect. Whatever's protecting that ship, it's like nothing we've ever seen." Stevens clenched his fists. "Options?" Chen shook his head. "We're out of conventional ones, sir. But there's the Omega Protocol." Stevens closed his eyes, knowing what that meant. When he opened them, his face was a mask of iron dedication. Do it. Minutes later, a salvo of prototype antimatter warheads streaked towards the Grex armada. The explosions were beyond description, reality itself seeming to tear apart. When the blinding light faded, Stevens saw multiple Grex capital ships reduced to drifting wreckage. But the cost? Where New Avalon's glittering capital had stood, there was now only a smoldering crater. Billions of lives snuffed out in an instant. "Status report," Stevens said, his voice hollow. Chen's face was ashen. "Sir, we've inflicted heavy damage on the enemy fleet, but New Avalon is gone, and the remaining Grex ships are pressing their attack. Our production facilities are crippled." Stevens stared at the tactical display, watching as the seemingly endless waves of Grex reinforcements poured into the system. He made the hardest decision of his life. "Send the order," he said quietly. "All forces are to fall back to Sol. We make our stand at Earth." As the battered remains of humanity's once proud fleet limped towards their homeworld, Stevens knew the fate of his entire species now hung in the balance. The final battle was about to begin.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.